Major funding for this program was made possible through the generous support of South Florida Water Management District, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Florida Department of Education, Dynamite Plant Food, an environmentally sustainable twice-a-year fertilizer designed to reduce nutrient runoff.
This is a subtle place. There are no mountains, no canyons, no glaciers or gorges or geysers. It is the Florida Everglades, a land of beauty and diversity, Florida's original Magic Kingdom. There are no other Everglades in the world. They have always been, one of the unique regions of the earth, wrote Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, first champion of the Florida Everglades. Over the past century, everything that has been done to the Everglades has been done to benefit mankind. Now we have realized that perhaps we have gone too far. Endless draining and development of what was once part of a vast floodplain has pushed the Everglades to the brink of collapse. In an effort to protect one of the greatest wetlands on the planet, a massive restoration plan has been initiated. It is the largest ecological restoration project ever conceived. It is scheduled to take 40 years and may cost more than $10 billion. The stakes could not be higher. If successful, the needs of the Everglades and the needs of millions of people will be met. If it fails, the survival of South Florida hangs in the balance. Join a team of scientists and explorers as they plunge into the heart of the Everglades to learn about what's happened to this once great place and what's being done to restore and protect it. Late in the 2005 hurricane season, Hurricane Wilma entered the record books as the strongest Atlantic hurricane in recorded history. As residents and tourists began mandatory evacuation, a special ops team locks down in South Florida's Water Control and Command Center. Their job, to keep vast areas of heavily populated urban land from disappearing underwater. Most Floridians think the worst damage from a hurricane is caused by wind and rain. But the real danger is something most people have not thought about until recently. Catastrophic failure of dikes and water control structures. South Florida has a lot in common with New Orleans: vulnerability to major flood events. Water in Lake Okeechobee is perched well above the outlying area. and it is held back by a series of remote-controlled dams, gates, and pumps. These structures are designed to hold the water back, much like the levees in New Orleans. If these structures are breached or are released in the wrong order, it could have catastrophic results. And like New Orleans, parts of South Florida would be devastated for years.
If we were to abandon this system at this particular point in time, there are literally millions of people that are living and working in areas that would not be habitable.
It seems impossible that in a state like Florida, a break in a flood control structure could cause such damage, but it has happened before. In the late 1920s, several killer storms caused massive flooding in southern Florida. In 1928, a Category 5 hurricane weakened slightly before coming ashore in West Palm Beach. 6,000 people lived on the shores of Lake Okeechobee, and by the next day, nearly half would be dead. The unnamed storm hit the lake with a fury. A 5-foot earthen dike was breached and literally ripped apart. The water release tore through the area with the force of a tsunami. As many as 3,000 people died in one day. There was a shortage of caskets, and by the 5th day, survivors of the storm were forced to burn the dead. The following winter, President Herbert Hoover toured the area and promised to build a towering 40-foot dike where the modest earthen barrier lost its battle. The first major flood control effort in South Florida. It stands almost 40 feet high and runs for almost 80 miles. Florida legislators declared a war on water. They wanted it harnessed, tamed, and contained.
Water is a common enemy. It is hereby declared under Florida Law, Chapter 21, that in said district, surface waters, which shall include rainfall and the overflow of rivers and streams, are a common enemy of the state.
Water may have been man's enemy, but it's the critical element that shaped the state and supports the unique biodiversity of the peninsula. The Everglades was born well after the last ice age, when sea levels had stabilized roughly 5,000 years ago. As mangrove coastlines, hardwood forests, and cypress swamps began to develop in Florida, an enormous sheet of gin-clear water covered the lower half of the state, slowly running south to nourish the estuaries that supported a dynamic ocean wonderland. Up to the beginning of the last century, the natural watercourse thrived. But as industrialized settlers poured into Florida, they transformed the environment. The desire for farmland, timber, and land for development fueled a non-stop succession of drainage canals, exposing millions of acres of previously flooded land for development. Killer hurricanes spawned further outcry for protection from floods, and the growing coastal populace needed a dependable supply of water. In less than 50 years, over half of the original Everglades would be permanently lost. Now, a team of explorers and scientists are planning to get a closer look at the entire Everglades watershed. Jill Heinerth and Wes Skiles are environmental filmmakers whose work has spanned the globe. They will be joined by scientists Mark Clark and Tom Morris, whose experiences in this watershed collectively represent more than 50 years. The goal: two teams will take very different approaches to exploring the Everglades ecosystem. Jill and Tom will paddle, dive, swim, and hike to cover more than 300 miles of the greater Everglades ecosystem. Mark and Wes will take to the air, to learn about America's largest restoration effort and the world's most expensive environmental cleanup.
One of the things that's hard to think about with the restoration is that there's a huge watershed, and we mostly think about the Everglades as being in the southern part of Florida, but in reality the watershed reaches all the way up almost to Orlando, where we are right now. We have to get the quantity of the water, the quality of the water, the distribution of the water, and the timing of that water all throughout this system. It's a pretty incredible task.
There's lots of people that are going to be moving to Florida, and we've got to find some sort of way to accommodate them so that we can preserve our beautiful natural environment here in Florida.
But it's a big task.
As Mark and Wes begin aerial observations of the Everglades headwaters, Jill and Tom head downstream.
Absolutely stunning. We're here in the headwaters of the Everglades, this great nourishing path of water that feeds the environment, humanity, agriculture, all the way out to the coral reefs in the Gulf Stream. It's all connected.
You're so poetic. I was thinking if I spit in this water right here that it would end up going to the Keys.
This is the Kissimmee Basin. It's the part of the system that few people ever think of as belonging to the Everglades. But it's the source water. Everything flows south from this quiet place not far from Orlando's theme parks. From the air, Wes and Mark get the bird's eye view. While from water level, Tom and Jill experience the majesty of this corner of the Everglades.
This area is so beautiful, Tom. I can hardly believe it's in danger.
Up here in the headwaters, in Lake Russell, it looks pretty much like it did 100 years ago. It's in nice shape. I would even go as far as calling it pristine.
These little dwarf cypress trees are just incredible looking.
I love these trees. You know, it's anybody's guess as to quite how old these things are, but I would imagine several hundred years at least. You know, looking at these trees, you can read the landscape of the past. For these trees to get a start, to germinate, this lake had to be dry out to the very edges of the cypress trees that are farthest out from shore.
So most of the cypress trees in the state have been cut down for timber?
The big, magnificent cypress were pretty much all cut down about 100 years ago. And they were pretty darn thorough. There were probably, I would guess there's probably 30 trees left that weren't hollow. Those guys didn't get.
There's a lot of little gators in this area.
I think we're going to see a lot of alligators on this trip. But you know, that wouldn't have been the case 50 years ago. We would have been lucky to see maybe one a day because they've been poached so ruthlessly for their hides.
Ooh, this one's big.
Yeah, that's what I'd call an apex predator, the top of the food chain. When they get that big, their only real enemy is us.
This is just so beautiful.
Sadly, few areas have remained this pristine. The big trouble for the Everglades started back in the late 1800s. Developers could see South Florida's potential, but first it would have to be drained of its nuisance water. An ambitious engineer, Hamilton Diston, thought he had the perfect plan. His strategy? To reroute the Everglades headwaters, the Kissimmee River. By straightening the Kissimmee, he could send the water directly to Lake Okeechobee and ultimately east and west to the ocean. If successful, he believed it would also stop the flow of water into South Florida. By removing the water, he would create thousands of acres of new fertile land to sell. Despite Diston's best intentions, it is now considered to be one of the biggest environmental mistakes ever made. Diston's proclamation that water was the source of all evil was echoed by the post-World War II Army Corps of Engineers.
Death, as water shows its other face, hideous, unrelenting, shrieking its rage, the vicious scourge of mankind, burying life and land under its relentless and merciless depths. This is the story of such water and its mastery by the determined hand of man.
This was the attitude towards our natural systems.
The liquid heart of this area is Lake Okeechobee, the big water. This monster had to be controlled by bigger levees and by bigger canals that would give it bigger outlets to the sea.
Armed with the post-war economy and new technology, the Army Corps executed Diston's original plan on a massive scale. When completed, they had successfully replaced the meandering Kissimmee River with a 56-mile-long, 30-foot-deep channel. They also cut massive ditches east and west out of Lake Okeechobee to the coasts. They eliminated more than half the Kissimmee River's length, and in doing so, drained over 500,000 acres of land that could now be used for farming and development.
But we've got to control the water, make it do our bidding. This takes pumping stations, spillways and dams all the way from the upper reaches of the Kissimmee River Basin down to the southern tip of the mainland of Florida.
Stormwater from farms and communities that were built on the newly drained land poured into the Kissimmee Canal, creating a rapid transport system for phosphorus-rich waters. Water could no longer dwell in the floodplain and be cleansed by nature. Instead, single storm events sent violent volumes of nutrient-rich water directly into Lake Okeechobee and then east and west to the Atlantic and Gulf. It would take environmental scientists decades to fully comprehend the heavy toll that was being dealt to the natural systems. By the time it was completed in 1971, it was commonly agreed the canal should never have been built.
So Mark, right below us is all this land that was reclaimed by Diston.
That's right, and reclaiming at the time was to try to make it manageable land, get the water off it, and actually turn it into productive agriculture.
Three decades after the straightening of the Kissimmee, much has changed. But farmers like the Williamsons are desperately trying to hang on to a land that few remember. And in doing so, they are leading protection efforts by converting massive tracts of their land into natural wetlands to manage and eliminate contaminated runoff from their farms. Others are making land available for storage to help the distribution of critically needed water.
This part of Florida is the part of Florida that a lot of people never get to see. I mean, a few years ago I was proud to say that Okeechobee County has 5 times as many cattle as it does human residents here, and I'm proud of that fact. But the other fact is we're within 150 miles of about 13 million people. So this is a part of Florida that a lot of people do not know about. This is cattle country, this is agriculture, this is very beautiful woods and hammocks and environment. And I think it's just very important that we find a way to preserve that.
Over 5 million acres of agricultural land has been converted to suburban sprawl since farming's peak in the 1970s. When open spaces are paved over, this undeveloped land, which is critical for habitat, protecting the water supply and maintaining a safe American food source, will be lost.
I think if we ever lose agriculture, it's going to be something that's going to be like an endangered species going extinct. I mean, it's going to be gone forever. It's been said that houses are the final crop, and if you divide up all these large ranch lands and you plant houses all the way across it, agriculture's gone. It'll be extinct. And this way of life, this kind of secret part of Florida that we love and enjoy so much will be gone forever. We have to be able to stay in business and make a profit, but not damage the environment and all the ecosystems that go along with that.
The original Kissimmee River meandered over 100 miles from Lake Kissimmee to Lake Okeechobee. When it rained, the river swelled into a large floodplain almost 2 miles wide, though only a few feet deep. During the drier winter season, the river would shrink back into its slow, twisting course. This cycle was critical to the many species of organisms that thrived along the Kissimmee. When citizens demanded protection from floods, the Army Corps of Engineers channelized the river, transforming it into a 56-mile-long canal. By draining almost 35,000 acres of floodplain, more than 68 miles of remnant river ceased to flow. But with the vanishing marsh, so went the natural filters that protected the river from phosphorus and other agricultural and urban runoffs. And that set up a direct pipeline seeping contaminated water straight into the heart of the Everglades. In a massive effort to undo damage done to the Kissimmee, scientists and engineers came up with an ingenious yet simple plan: backfill parts of the Kissimmee Canal and reconnect sinuous corridors of the old crooked river. The hope was that by returning a major portion of the river to its natural flow path and floodplain, that it would come back to life. It was a risky and costly plan, which relied on Mother Nature's ability to heal itself. The gamble appears to have paid off.
So you can see down there the boundary between the old channelized river and the part that's being restored.
All the native vegetation starting to come back, and you can barely even see the remnant of the old channel.
And the birds, I mean, immediately, the second we entered this area, you can see a change in the wildlife.
And what you may not see is that these natural wetlands now filter the water again, and everything south of here will be healthier for it.
It's really incredible. The canal is completely gone, and what remains is the old Kissimmee River, the old crooked river.
By slowing down the river, water gets stored in the floodplain, allowing for a longer dwell time for cleansing. The goals of conservation, filtration, and habitat enhancement are all achieved. The Kissimmee River ends here at Lake Okeechobee, the 4th largest lake in America.
Big old Lake O used to be called the liquid heart of Florida, but now it's the source of one of the largest problems facing Everglades restoration.
Yeah, it's about 700 square miles now, but before they put the levee in, when the lake levels were up, they pretty much spread, quite a ways to the west, a little bit to the east, and of course it was connected directly with the Everglades to the south.
And now we've learned it's phosphorus in the water that's a big part of the problem.
All of the runoff from farms and development has impacted the lake, and it is devastating coastal estuaries and regions to the south.
It was us.
It was us.
That changed it all. And it's this water that's leaving Lake Okeechobee to the west and to the east that is a big challenge for us right now, isn't it?
Yeah, the water that leaves from here is actually headed towards the Indian River Lagoon, and that phosphorus can be a real problem out there with algal blooms and things like that.
The things we do good and the things we do bad.
And really we want to take this water and send it back south, the way it historically used to enter the Everglades. But the phosphorus in that water is a real problem.
And the restoration plan is really built around moving more water to the south and using natural biological process to clean it, right?
Right.
Phosphorus is introduced to the environment from lawn and agricultural fertilizers. But when high levels of this nutrient reach water bodies, it can fuel explosive plant growth and algae blooms. Algae blooms use up large quantities of oxygen in the water and block the sunlight from reaching plants and fish that live below it. A massive die-off or dead zone results. Humanity has introduced these excess nutrients into the environment, So restoration plans include programs called Best Management Practices, or BMPs, that bring together private farmers and local and state governments working together to protect the environment and water resources. Wes and Mark visit the future of livestock waste management to learn about a system that contains and utilizes wastes, preventing them from entering water systems. In the past, one of the key sources of nutrient-laden waters was direct discharge from livestock operations. Noting the decline in water quality, the state decided that the impact was unacceptable and began working with farmers to minimize direct runoff into water bodies.
For the environment, these confined areas actually allow for total containment of the waste, such that it can be collected and then treated. For the animal production, you can actually regulate the temperature such that summertime milk production stays high because they can keep the animals comfortable and cool.
You can't see it, but you can feel it. There's a strong, cool wind in this place.
About a 10 to 12 mile an hour breeze blowing through here based on those fans all the way in the back.
Way that the sludge is taken out, that's with these.
In an innovative approach, farmers are turning pollution into products they can sell. Environmental scientist Neil Beckingham is helping this dairy farm experiment with techniques that not only manage waste, but also create a marketable product for fertilizing urban lawns.
So here we have the treated water, this section here, and then this is the sludge that goes through to the compost.
So this water used to go out into the environment. By running it through this best management practice, we can actually separate it into water that can be reused for flushing, and then this is collected and exported from the basin, taking phosphorus with it.
That's right. The intention is a closed loop system where we recycle the water and we take the sludge, which has all the phosphorus, all the nutrients in it, and that goes out of the basin in the solid content.
That's really a perfect solution.
Yep.
At the cooling barns, solids are collected and separated. Once treated, liquids can then be reused as washdown or irrigation, while solids are transformed into an organic fertilizer, ideal for suburban yards and gardens.
So what they're doing is loading up the solids that were separated with the nutrient reduction process. And when that truck leaves, with it will go phosphorus out of the watershed. It may be used for compost or on people's yards where it can actually do some good.
For this approach to be successful, farmers will need to find partners that need their byproducts, recycling on a massive scale. Because when too many nutrients end up in the natural environment, it's waterways that suffer. All water on Earth is ultimately connected. Rainfall that lands on the surface of the Earth passes through many different environments. This stormwater runoff soaks into the ground and travels through culverts and ditches, picking up contaminants being carried downstream from every aspect of society. A major challenge for restoration is to minimize stormwater impact within the historic Everglades boundary. Stormwater slowly seeps into Lake Okeechobee from many sources. Over time, these pollutants gather like a ticking time bomb on the bottom of the lake. When hurricanes and tropical storms pass over the shallow lake, they create large standing waves that slosh back and forth from shore to shore. As rain falls and swells increase, a contaminated brew of bottom sediments is resuspended in the water column. And once the lake levels get too high, drastic measures have to be taken to protect people from floodwaters that used to cover the landscape. A dangerous chain of events follow when contaminated water has to be released through waterways to the coastal estuaries that support life beyond our shores. The restoration plan consists of 68 major projects. The goal: undo unintended damage created by drainage and flood control canals and to return the water back to where it belongs, the Florida Everglades.
Gotta watch your shins through here.
Yeah.
We haven't seen much wildlife today.
No.
All hiding from us.
Did your mama ever tell you to wear long pants?
No, but does your mama worry about you when she knows you're way out here in the wilds?
Yeah, she sure does.
Well, my mama did make me wear long pants to church.
Just south of Lake Okeechobee rests some of the richest farmland in the Americas. Prior to the 1930s, it was a boundless pond apple orchard and sawgrass marsh. But with the construction of the Hoover Dike and dozens of drainage canals, more than 1 million acres of land was transformed into productive agricultural lands to feed a growing nation.
My name is Rick Roth. I'm a third-generation farmer. I farm in the Everglades agricultural area. I do tours all the time. I say, welcome to paradise. This is farming as good as it gets. I farm year-round. I can grow a lot of different crops.
The main reason, other than the subtropical climate, a rich deposit of peat soil that had been laid down by seasonal floods over thousands of years. It's known as black gold, and protecting this muck soil is critical to the farmer's survival.
It really is. It is the most incredible soil I've ever seen.
That's one of the real challenges because of the value of this soil is really to try to maintain these organic soils to help support this vegetation.
That's exactly right.
Prior to drainage, sawgrass seed and dead plants slowly accumulated and built a rich organic soil overlaying the limestone bedrock. After drainage, many farmers were attracted to the new agricultural area, but with the knowledge that only a limited amount of soil was available for their use. That was 80 years ago. These houses, victims of soil subsidence, are now almost 8 feet above the ground. Drained and exposed to air, peat soil can easily burn or blow away. But the real culprit is a process called biomechanical oxidation. Tiny microbes break down the carbon in the soil, releasing carbon dioxide into the environment. The soils literally disappear into the atmosphere. And in the interim, rising costs, regulations, and extreme weather events have forced many farmers out of business.
I don't think there's any farmers left farming in the United States today that don't love it. I think it has to be a labor of love. It's something you really have to enjoy doing. You do it. I have a sign on my desk that says it's only work if you'd rather be doing something else.
Despite the issues facing farmers in the Everglades agricultural area, to the public, the area is synonymous with one thing: big sugar. Big sugar in Florida is more than a crop. It is a powerful political force as well. In the 1960s, in an effort to displace Castro's Cuba as a sugar supplier, government subsidies allowed sugarcane farming in the Everglades to thrive. Farmland dedicated to sugar in Florida grew tenfold, and by 1999, the average American was consuming about 40 pounds of Everglades sugar a year. Corporate farming became a powerful and influential industry and was frequently blamed for the failing health of the Everglades. But the liability for the destruction of the Everglades cannot be blamed on a single industry. The demand for land for agriculture, the need for flood control, and the belief that it was man's destiny to bring the utterly unusable parts of Florida into submission were the driving forces behind the ecosystem's decline. It was a public decision to create the Everglades agricultural area through drainage. It was approved by 90% of South Florida voters. Restoration of the Everglades ecosystem relies on key fundamentals: cleaning up phosphorus-laden water, returning sheet flow to the lower basin, and creating massive water storage systems for the needs of people, farming, and the environment. Knowing that setting a maximum phosphorus limit was the only hope for truly restoring the ecosystem, the Everglades Forever Act placed a threshold on phosphorus levels not to exceed 10 parts per billion. Despite massive lobbying efforts from industry, agriculture, and developers, Florida Governor Jeb Bush defended the benchmark, refusing to allow it to be raised above the level that was considered necessary for a healthy Everglades.
Our commitment to protect and restore this vital habitat is unwavering.
In their first attempt to decrease nutrients by a mandated 25%, they surpassed their goal, cutting phosphorus discharge by 55%. The key to their success: private and state partnerships that work together to implement new farming techniques and BMPs. They laser-leveled fields to reduce runoff. They carefully conserved water by moving it from field to field. And they specialized and reduced direct application of fertilizers to crops.
A lot of nutrients come up through the Kissimmee River.
And you're receiving part of that
We're
water.
receiving part of that water. And that water that we're receiving it at a concentration around 150 parts per billion of phosphorus. But when it leaves our farm, it's around 90.
So the water is actually coming in more polluted than it is leaving your farm.
Absolutely. And it's because of the nature of the crops that we grow and the type of soil that we have.
So between the fact that the sugarcane really doesn't need a lot of phosphorus, plus the way you're managing the farm, you're actually reducing the phosphorus concentration in the water you're using before it leaves the farm.
Exactly right.
Despite the progress being made by farmers in the Everglades agricultural area, the goal to drop phosphorus levels to below 10 parts per billion remains costly and elusive. Already burdened with the perception that they are the problem, many farmers are faced with the question, is the battle worth fighting to preserve the American food supply and open space when they could easily sell their land to the hungry South Florida real estate market? Few individuals have come to understand that the alternative urban landscape has the potential to pollute on a much larger scale. The decline of the Everglades has created far-reaching impacts. Perhaps no group of individuals has felt the diminishing health more than its most permanent residents, the Seminole and Miccosukee tribes. Both tribes remain loyal to their belief that land was a gift that could not be owned. Today, they continue to hold on to their traditional customs and beliefs. In their role, they remain true guardians of the Everglades and a powerful voice for their homeland.
My name's Buffalo Tiger. My Indian name, Miccosukee name's Henihachi. It's my real Indian name. And we live in Florida Everglades, and this is our homeland.
Buffalo Tiger is a Miccosukee tribal leader who has long fought to protect both the tradition of his people and the land he came from.
The village I know, we always have a lot of food to eat there, and that's why we say we don't need the money to live. That nature would give us some food. But you don't have to look hard. Years ago, it used to be plenty wildlife. We used to have wild hogs, bear, and panthers, name it. And then too many snakes, too many mosquitoes, too many all kinds of insects to bite. Water used to be very, very clean. Today, we don't eat a fish here. We cannot because it's full of mercury and all those things in the water. Bad water, dirty water.
Unwilling to watch their homeland succumb to unacceptable environmental changes, Florida's first residents are fighting to protect the Everglades.
We are trying to save the glades the way it was. Been fighting, trying to get some control, maybe partial control in this area and water. But we have to learn how to get along with nature. It's the only thing I can say to the public today. We need to clean water, and we need all the plants, all the life exists.
Their spiritual roots originate from their belief that Breathmaker made them and placed them here on earth to live in balance with nature.
And nature ties everything together. That's what I can understand. If nature, I'm talking about, they love everything tying together. It's a Breathmaker's work. He put it here. He planted us. We grow together. We live together. We must do that.
Scientists traveling through buffalo tiger's native homeland are learning that the solution to healing the Everglades may be embodied in Breathmaker's natural processes.
I'm Sue Newman. I'm a wetland scientist. I've been lucky enough to work in the Everglades for the past 15 years. I study plants, animals, and nutrients, principally looking at how phosphorus has impacted this ecosystem.
Water conservation areas are enclosed by dikes. They retain overflows of stormwater that can help quench the escalating thirst of South Florida during dry seasons.
So Sue, where are we?
We're at a site that we've called E1. It's the northernmost site we're going to visit today, and as you can see, it's densely vegetated with cattail.
And this is really where they first started seeing the major impacts of phosphorus on Everglades vegetation.
Cattails are native to Florida, but they have become a nuisance species, thriving on phosphorus-rich runoff from farms and yards.
So Wes, one of the things about phosphorus is that it's really not toxic. In fact, it actually helps plants grow. That's why we use it on lawns to fertilize and then crops. And out here, it's actually allowing all of this vegetation to grow very rapidly. And that's what's really causing the changes and the impacts. It's not a dead zone out here. It's very vibrant and green, actually. But the communities have shifted, and that's really the impact.
A place like this supports an awful lot of wildlife. But if we over-enrich it with phosphorus, the cattails will choke out a lot of these other plants and reduce the wildlife value. But this place is in good shape right now. In fact, this is what Everglades Marsh is supposed to look like.
In this area, phosphorus has made cattails very competitive, to the exclusion of other natural species. These cattails are too dense to attract wading birds, but mosaics of thinner vegetation support a diverse and healthy community. Sue and other scientists are trying to understand how phosphorus, water depth, and other factors impact the ecosystem. Their pioneering work has led to a new approach to solving one of the Everglades' biggest problems.
Yes, I'm very fortunate in that actually I think my science has made a difference. We have studied this nutrient gradient and we've shown how phosphorus changes along that gradient, and that information has been used to model the stormwater treatment areas so we can use nature to clean water and save millions to restore this ecosystem as well as others.
About 10 miles to the south, they see a stunning landscape that closely resembles the historic Everglades Marsh. Mark finds a stark difference between bottom sediments at the two sites. There is a noticeable white layer within the new core sample.
Sure enough, that's really different.
As the team moves southward, the soil samples indicate that the phosphorus levels are dropping. It's an important revelation that as they travel south through the system, phosphorus is being absorbed by aquatic plants.
So what's the stuff floating on the surface here?
This is calcareous periphyte. a community of algae, fungus, and bacteria that grows as a thin film over rocks and plants.
Any other dive before this, and I would have thought I was seeing horrible pollution. But I just realized that instead of looking at grungy algae, I was seeing periphyton, the base of the Everglades food chain.
A lot of people look at this as pond scum, but as a biologist, I see this from an entirely different point of view. Periphyton is the major primary producer in the Everglades. It's the stuff that captures the sunlight and grows the food for the animals and creates the oxygen for the water and even the atmosphere above it. You can tell the water is in pretty good shape around here just by the amount of calcareous periphyton.
I guess you could think of it like a sponge. It feels like a sponge, and it's soaking up nutrients and pollution like a sponge would.
The Everglades is unique. There's no other place on the planet quite like this. This system has evolved under very, very low levels of nutrients. If you get too many nutrients in this community, the calcareous periphyton can't survive. It can't stand too much fertilizer. If we lose the periphyton, we're going to lose a key food source that feeds all the other animals that are dependent on this ecosystem.
This is why we came here. This is what we want to see. This is indicative of clean water. It adds oxygen, it takes out phosphorus, it changes the chemistry such that phosphorus is dropped out of the water with calcium, and that's what this white layer is. So you can see it. We're very happy to see this here. This really is indicative of a really good, clean water quality, a good Everglades. It's a hard sell.
It's ugly and gooey and it stinks, but it's good.
It's good. It's based the food chain. Lots of fish and other organisms eat it too.
The global loss of natural wetlands has alerted us to how powerful they are as filtration systems. A marsh can do millions of dollars of nutrient removal for free. So scientists and engineers are creating constructed wetlands or stormwater treatment areas that mimic Mother Nature by using plants to remove contaminants from water.
We're just about 20 miles west of the city of West Palm Beach. And we're on very close to the historic edge of the Everglades. People have asked me, what's the real difference in Florida between now and between when you first came? And the answer is simple. The answer is 10 million people. There's 10 million more people here than when I first came.
And they continue to come.
And they continue to come. And they continue to come. This is
As a pioneer in water management, Jack Malloy has spent more than 40 years finding solutions for a growing population. Now he's giving Wes and Mark a tour of an ambitious project that reconstructs wetlands with the goal of cleansing phosphorus from water before sending it into the natural environment.
And it's a series of these big stations that are moving this water southward through the treatment process.
Through the cleaning process. And this project provides a great and large outdoor laboratory to really deal with that.
It almost seems ironic that the means by which these stormwater treatment areas operate is really to recreate a wetland that used to be here.
But in reality, the historic Everglades marsh would not be able to handle the phosphorus loads that humanity is creating. It takes a specially engineered mix of plants to cope with the challenges of modern stormwater. In STAs, a massive staged process matches the plant species most ideally suited for metabolizing the specific level of nutrient in the water.
In reality, for us to get somewhat back to where we were, we have to combine a mechanical process along with a natural biological process, right?
Yeah, and that's a real challenge.
Water leaving the Everglades agricultural area passes through a pump station into a series of treatment cells that are filled with vegetation that can take up phosphorus. Nutrient-rich water passes through emergent vegetation like cattails, then submerged aquatics, and finally, rich blankets of periphyton. These plants take their turn, further cleansing the water and dropping phosphorus levels by about 80%. From there, clean water heads south, entering the natural wetlands of the Everglades. Stormwater treatment areas and best management practices have prevented well over 2,200 metric tons of phosphorus from entering the Everglades in the past decade. Although this is significant, it will take implementation on a massive scale to nurture the remaining Everglades.
Up till now, we haven't had a process to treat water from Mother Nature's areas. So you might call this our water treatment process for Mother Nature, because we intend to put this water back into her original Everglades to sustain it.
The commitment of environmental organizations, state, and tribal leaders is clear, but federal aid and widespread citizen support are crucial for the future of the ecosystem and water resources of South Florida. Despite the challenges that lie ahead, the Everglades restoration effort is well on its way. In the Kissimmee River, over 1/3 of the river has been restored to its natural meandering course. The flow of the river and the life that it sustains has returned more quickly than scientists expected. It's an impressive message from the natural world that if the original hydrology of these systems can be restored, life in balance can return. Citizens groups and legislators have agreed that managing and restoring Lake Okeechobee is of the highest priority, and they are making progress by implementing an accelerated schedule to solve these issues. Farmers in the Everglades agricultural area continue to self-finance research and innovative techniques to minimize the runoff from their farms. They have already reduced phosphorus levels coming off their farms by 55%. Pioneering scientists in water conservation areas and stormwater treatment areas are successfully treating billions of gallons of phosphorus-rich water using aquatic plants and natural processes. An additional 50,000 acres of these innovative treatment systems are being planned and constructed. It is a remarkable story of how committed citizens and government can slow and in some cases reverse the devastating impact of over 100 years of manipulation. Can the restoration be called a success? Every day, land within the Everglades is lost to new development while the remaining natural areas thirst for promised water. In the next episode of Water's Journey, the team will continue south into the heart of the ecosystem to reveal the mysteries of this magical place. They will learn that the impact of human activities has reached the most remote regions of the Everglades, and that the very existence of our marine estuaries and coral reefs is severely threatened. Join us for the next episode of Water's Journey Everglades to learn what is being done to save the Everglades from the never-ending conquest of man.
To purchase this episode of Water's Journey, Everglades, Restoring Hope, call 1-888-354-2376. Major funding for this program was made possible through the generous support of South Florida Water Management District, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Florida Department of Education, Dynamite Plant Food, an environmentally sustainable twice-a-year fertilizer designed to reduce nutrient runoff.